Hello and welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining me today. In today's video we're going to be drawing and painting this pig, and I wanted to get a little bit more character in him. Usually when I'm doing an animal's face, the character tends to come from the expression in the eye, but pigs have such small eyes, there isn't a lot of expression there, so perhaps we want to draw him in a bit more of an illustrative way to get a bit more character. You can see the curve of his mouth here is almost smiling, so we could maybe exaggerate that a little bit, and then we really need to think about getting all of these lines around the eye to really make that stand out more than it does. So I'm going to be doing a drawing using this Unipin fine liner, and it's a black one, and the size of this is 0.5 and it's both water and fade proof, which is important if you want to put some watercolour paint over the top of this. I won't be doing too much painting, I'll just add a little touch of pink I think at the end, just to give him, you know, a touch of colour rather than doing the whole thing. He's really quite white in a lot of places where the light's catching his hair. So I'm going to be using this paper, which is the Fabriano one. As you can see, it's £140 and it's cold pressed. So although it's not a completely smooth one, it is smooth enough for drawing on. So you can see here the different types of paper that you can get, and if you do get one that's too rough, you tend to find that the nib of your pen or your pencil sort of bounces across the paper. You want something that's quite smooth if you're doing an ink drawing, but you still want it to be able to take those watercolour paints. So I don't ever get anything less than £140 in weight when I'm using watercolours. Okay, so to begin with, I think we do need to do some pencil guidelines and just have a look at the shape of his face here. I'm not overly familiar with pigs, it's not something that I come across very often. And for those of you that have watched my previous videos on doing animals' faces, you'll know that I talk quite often about looking for the skeleton underneath, seeing where the eye socket is and where the skull is, etc. It's quite difficult on him because I'm not familiar with him, and because I don't know how much of that is fat over the top, because obviously it's a very fat animal and the skull could be quite deep inside there. You're not seeing the bones in the same way that you would on a horse or a cow, where it's got that very short smooth hair and you can see all the bones around the eye socket, etc. When you do come to drawing with your pen, you want to make sure you get all these lovely curves and shapes of the hair here. I will link this picture in the description below so that you can print it off or get it up on your monitor yourself, and you'll be able to see more closely the way that the hairs are going, and that's going to make it a much more interesting picture. You can see here a line between his breast. So this is either side of his breastbone, and you can see that there. So that's one thing, and you can see that the end of the cheek is here, so this is probably where his skull's ending. So you need to start by having a good look and thinking about where things are. We've got a little dip in there where the hairs are going over and then they're going up again, so again that's probably where the top of his skull ends. And having a good look and a think about it before you start is always helpful. So I'm just going to put some guidelines in with my pencil now. Look carefully at the measurements. So if we look, as I said, his cheek ends about here. If we look there at that measurement, it's quite similar to the measurement from the bottom of his chin to the top of his ears as well, and that fits more or less into a square. So I'll go ahead now and do some pencil guidelines, and then I'll come back to you when I'm putting some more pen on. Okay, so I've put quite a few guidelines on there, but don't forget you can rub those out later, and it's always easier to make sure that you've got your drawing correct before you start putting your ink on, because of course you can't erase your ink. So I quite often work straight onto the paper with my ink, but for something like this it is a good idea to have those measurements correct because it needs to look convincing as an animal. You can probably tell by my voice I've been off work for a couple of weeks with a bad chest, so I'm feeling a bit rusty today, so it might not be just perfect there. I think maybe this eye needs to come further across, doesn't it? So if we look at the edge of the eye, it's coming down from the centre, so yes, it needs to be so correct again. And this is a good way of working things out also, is to line them up. So if the top of his eye comes to where his nose starts dipping down there and to this section of his ear, we know it's here. So again, I had that in the wrong place, so just keep looking and keep having a good think about it, and you can correct things as you start going along with your pen as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and I'll use a series of different strokes. Although it's obviously a one size pen with a round nib, you can get a lot of interest in there by altering your strokes, lengthening your strokes, being quite free once you come to putting things like the hair on, varying the width between your strokes as well to get darker and lighter areas. Okay, so it might take me a while to do this pen drawing, so I'll pop some music on whilst I do that, and then we'll come back and pop a little bit of colour on. If you do have any questions about the process of the drawing, etc., do put them down in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But until I finish this and come back and do the paint, I will pop a little bit of music on for you. So I'll see you again shortly. Okay, so I'm quite happy in general with the drawing and with the measurements and everything, but I think I'm going to add some thicker lines to this with this 1.5 size. So we've gone from 0.5 to 1.5. If you don't have another size of pen, don't worry, you can just spend much more time and gradually build up the lines where you want it to be looking a little bit thicker. You're going to have more time than me. I've done this very quickly. I mean, the whole thing took me less than a quarter of an hour. And I did it, like I said, very, very quickly, just really roughly putting in those lines where his skin's crinkling over there and some of these lines of the hair. You can spend much more time getting it more accurate if you want to. I do think sometimes though working quickly gives a bit more character to an animal, keeps it a bit freer and gives it a bit more expression. But like I say, spend your time getting those hairs going in the right direction and getting a bit of movement in there. And don't be afraid to have it looking a little bit tatty and scruffy, because his hairs are coming off the top of his ears and they're coming out of his chin. He's very hairy. Even inside his ears is all very hairy. But we're sort of, it's difficult to distinguish a little bit here which are the hairlines and which are the lines of the form of the animal, which is why I'm going to just in one or two places pop some extra lines in with this slightly thicker pen. And I could go on all day really, because there's so many lines on there. Okay, so I'm going to get that line of his mouth in with this, make that slightly thicker. Like I say, it's much more of an illustrative type of a painting than a photorealistic one, to try and get a little bit of that character in. It was quite difficult doing his snout, because really you can just about see that there's an extra bit of nostril showing there, but it's difficult to tell because he's got mud all over there. So try and see which bits are actual form of the animal compared to which bits are mud or hair, etc. And again, he's got one or two little bits of markings as well. He's got a little black mark under here, a little smudge, and I've just left those off because it makes it difficult then to distinguish the form of the animal if you put too many of these markings in. And you can do that with the paint. You can put those extra colours in with the paint. So here you're actually seeing the other side of his face, and I think these hairs that are going out here are the ones from this eye, the other eye on the other side. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier about taking a good look before you set off with your drawing at the form and where parts of his anatomy are going. This pen's actually running out a little bit, I don't know if you can tell. I'm not going to worry too much about that because it's actually a broken line, makes it, again, gives you that little bit of character and freedom to the drawing. It doesn't look too contrived. And you'll see how loosely I'm moving my arm. You also might be able to tell that I'm stood up. I think you can sketch more freely when you're standing. And I think that extra bit of line there has just given us some more definition in the form. But as always, like I've said in previous videos, you can spend a lot more time than me. I try and do these videos quite quickly, for one, so that I'm not boring you, and also because it's quite time consuming doing the video editing, etc. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry just a little while. So although they're sort of permanent markers and they are waterproof, they're not going to be waterproof if you paint on them straight away before they've dried. So do allow them to dry a little while before you put your paint on. So I'll come back in a moment and we'll have a look at putting some colour on. Okay, so I'm going to keep this very, very simple. I'm not going to paint the whole thing, but I'm going to just allow it to be a drawing really, just with that dash of colour. So I've made up some yellow there and some pink and a shadow colour. The pink, you'll notice I put a tiny touch of the green in. It was a little bit too bright, so adding the green, which is on the opposite side of the colour wheel to red, just neutralises that a little bit. And then I use those same two colours, the green and the pink, which is a rose, to make a shadow colour. These Sennelier ones are very bright anyway, and because I'm doing it more of an illustrative thing and less realistic, I thought it'd be nice to have some nice bright colours. So just those three colours, and we'll just pop them over by wetting the whole thing first and then dropping the colours in. So when you're doing something like this, use a nice big brush, and then you can do it quickly and the paints aren't drying out. If you're having to use a small brush, you'll find that your paint dries out in between colours. and just cover the whole thing. Like I say, make sure that that ink's dry first and cover the whole paper and go in both directions. Tilt your head to one side and you'll see if you've missed any bits where the light's not shining on the water, and then just allow it a few seconds just to sink into the paper. You don't want your paint just flying across the paper, you want it to be sinking in, so just allow that water to go down into the paper before you start applying your colour. So again, you want a nice big brush, you don't want to be being too fiddly. We're just adding a little touch of colour, we're not really painting as such, we're just adding a dash to this illustration. And this yellow colour could give you the idea of having straw behind, but of course you could use a brown for the building, or you could use a blue as if he was outside in the field for the sky behind. So it doesn't have to be yellow, you choose your own colours. And this is an earthy colour, an ochre. You might want to use a more bright yellow, you could use a cadmium. And make a very uneven wash behind, allowing some of the white of the paper as well. And we do want to leave some of the white of the paper on the animal himself because it is in a very sunny position. He's got a lot of sun on the top of his back there and on his ears. So just dash that pink around and allow some areas to stay white. And of course we've already got a little bit of the shadow in with the pen where we've built up those lines inside his ears. There isn't that much shadow on him, just underneath here and in his ears really, and under his chin. So I haven't mixed a colour up for doing the snout with the mud and things like that. We're keeping him very, very simple. Don't forget these colours are going to dry much lighter. And you'll see there it's running out into the yellow, don't worry about that. Again, he's got his little hairs flying off into the top of his head there. So getting that sort of scruffy feeling and allowing it to move around is not a problem. And you can always lift it out if you don't want that there, you can always lift a bit of white back out. But I don't really mind that. Again, if you want to get that light back on there, you can lift it out with a dry brush. It's got like a stripe of light across the back of his ear. But try not to overthink things too much, just pop the colour on. Okay, so now the shadow colour. And if you find it's moving too quick and you want to have more control, just allow it to dry a little bit, but not so much that it isn't flowing into each other. And that's going to help with his form as well, having that little bit of shadow around. If you wanted to do more detailed painting, then of course you can do. But I like when you've done something in ink to allow the drawing to show through. You can see it's pooling a little bit here. Of course it's not an expensive paper, so it will puddle here and there when you're using this volume of water. But when you've got a nice big brush like this, just squeeze the paint out, have a dry brush, and you can quickly lift that up. And this is the nice thing about working wet in wet. With a big brush you can be quite expressive, work very quickly. Just look at maybe getting one or two lines back in. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that and we'll see what it looks like when that dries. You could always come back when it's dry and put more layers on if you wanted to, if you want to go darker with some of your shadows. But I think we'll leave him like that and just allow the drawing to show through. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Let me know how you get on. Like I said earlier, there is a link to this photograph in the description below. So do go along and have a look at that and have a go at him if you get the time. Thanks for joining me and bye for now.